Hi, welcome back to another episode of Rebel Rock Money Talk. So today's episode is with my friend Dr. Patricia Guerrero, and she shares her experience from her first marriage and even into her second marriage as it relates to finances. She was not prepared, and this really is common in a lot of marriages where one spouse was really kind of the caretaker of the finances and the other spouse really wasn't that involved. She shares some really important money lessons here. And I would say that this applies not even just to married couples, whether you're newlywed or 20 years in or 50 years into your marriage, but it also applies to seniors. I would say people who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond. How have you organized your finances for your loved ones? When you pass away, have you made it as simple for them to be able to sort of wrap up and handle your finances to the best of your wishes? And it isn't even just about finances, right? It could be decisions about healthcare or just other things. So this episode really is to share some valuable lessons on how to keep your finances organized and why it's so important. So, this episode picks up where I first asked Patricia to share a little bit about her career because I think it's incredibly interesting. So, you will hear her share a little bit about what she does career wise, and then we will get into the discussion about finances. Let's go.
So time goes along, and I completed my medical degree in South America, and then I worked for the Red Cross in an underserved area in Colombia before I came back to the United States. So my brother and I both returned. My brother's also a physician, and I decided to take the track of adult medicine, and then became a cardiac electrophysiologist. So what that is I'm a cardiologist. So the track comes from internal medicine, so the care of adults and the medical problems, and then specialized in cardiology, which is the diseases that affect heart and vessels. And then cardiac electrophysiology is even more constrained to just the electrical disorders of the heart. So I'm the type of physician that I can take care of patients with medications, but I can also do certain procedures where I can implant pacemakers or devices that can shock the heart out of fatal rhythm disorders or terminate certain rhythm disorders by placing tools through IVs that either are from the veins that come from the upper extremity or the lower extremity. So as I've described to you, Leslie, the difference between a heart surgeon and a heart doctor that performs surgery is that a heart doctor that performs surgery tries to never have to crack open the chest. So we may make an incision, but we're never going into direct open chest contact with the heart. Whereas the heart surgeon has a training that derives from the surgical line. So they learn surgical techniques and then surgical techniques on the heart. And all of their work usually involves opening the chest in some fashion.
Got it. And
Yeah.
I love it. I'm a techie, I'm a nerd. So I love the whole combination of the biotech. So I love that whole, I think that's just amazing, the work that you do. So,
Well,
um,
we're so blessed because it's as a result of so much of the computer advances
mhm.
that really have allowed us, in particular in the cardiovascular space, to really expand the types of things that we can offer to patients that hopefully both allow them to live longer, but even more importantly, live better.
Right, just better quality of life. So can you walk us through a little bit, sort of what the dynamics were in that marriage, just as far as like the finances?
Mhm. So my first marriage was to a vascular surgeon, and I was 29 years old at the time, already having completed internal medicine and about to start the second phase of training, which is cardiology.
Okay,
So that is approximately 5 more years. So it takes a long time to train a cardiac electrophysiologist.
I'm sure.
And and my first husband Peter was 10 years older than I, 39, and he was a vascular surgeon. So going into the marriage, because I'm still in training, I am making an extremely modest salary, because when we're in training, it's literally just enough to get by. But fortunately for me, part of this training was at an institution called Washington University, and that's in St. Louis. So I was a cardiology fellow and EP fellow at Barnes. And so I think after the first or second year, there was an opportunity in where we could have a retirement account. And so in the form of, I think it was a 403B. And of course, I get these numbers mixed up. But what I realized is that, oh, this is fantastic, because it takes such a long time to train physicians. We are quite mature in terms of age. I don't want to say anything else in terms of age by the time we're done. And so we have historically, until recently, really not been able to build a retirement accounts like people in other fields, where they may get employed at a much younger age, maybe into industry that has retirement investments available. So I was already probably in my early 30s before this ever became an opportunity. So my first 3 years of training at Michigan State University, that was never an offering. So I could do but with Washington University, I was now able to say, okay, so much of my income could go into this retirement account, I could actually direct it. So I took advantage of that. And so that was the first thing that had happened every year, is I would say, okay, I want the maximum amount that I'm allowed to put away into this retirement account to be put away, and I will figure out how I'm going to live on the rest. And so meantime, my husband was already in practice, and where I was in training and where he was living and practicing and where our actual home was about 2.5 hours apart. So I would go back and forth. So what happened is that we were very careful about paying off all our loans. Fortunately, I had no medical school loans, because I had worked for the university while I was in school. So part of my compensation was that my tuition was waived. So that's how I avoided these high medical school costs. But we were paying off his, and we were successful at doing that. And then we started to really try to generate investments and pay off things like the house and things like that. So, but I have to acknowledge that I made a huge mistake, and it comes from naivete, is that I was really focused on acquiring medical education. And I really, at that point in my life, was much less interested in understanding how to really generate a plan for my financial future. And even though sometimes this conversation would come up with my husband, it was very much something that he took charge of. And so all of the information, including where the money was, how it was invested, outside of my little resources at WashU, it was directly reported to me, everything was actually managed by my husband. Okay. And so what happened is that while we were celebrating our 10th wedding anniversary, we were actually in the Pacific, on a very remote island called Moorea. He suddenly dies. He has sudden cardiac death, and I can't resuscitate him. And literally, I have to bring his remains home as best as I can from the mid-Pacific. So it just so happened, as timing occurred, that we were actually moving from Missouri, where we had our home and our practices, and we were moving to Florida. So our home in Missouri was already on the market. We were intending to close upon our return from this vacation that we were taking for our 10th wedding anniversary, and we had already purchased a home in Florida, and he dies. And so now I am bringing his body home from the South Pacific. I have to inter him in his hometown in Albany. I come back to Columbia to close on the property so I can move out of Columbia. Fortunately for me, my mother flew up from South America to make this journey with me. So we pack up the house, close on the house, and move all of our belongings to Florida. Now, much as happens in many of the lives of physicians, our training occurs over many long periods of time and often in different locations than where we're often homed. So it turns out that my husband at that time had gone for an additional year of training to Arizona. And so, and he had just completed that right before we both set off on our 10th wedding anniversary celebration. So all of his things were being moved from Arizona. So I finally get everything into the house in Florida. And I am starting to, I literally am going to start practice in 3 days. And I am now extremely concerned because, again, I haven't been managing the resources. I don't know where the money is. Where is it? Where is it adjudicated? Do I have enough money to pay the mortgage on the new house? And as things would have it, my husband's computer, where he kept all the financial records, died also. Oh. So my husband is dead. The computer is dead. And I have no idea where anything is other than I have a job, which is good. So I have a job, and this is why I told the story of my parents making it very clear that I had to be able to support myself. So so I knew I had a job, I can generate income, but those early days, those early weeks, it was really quite, at least anxiety producing for me, because I was brought up in a culture where you don't have debt. You save your money and you pay for things in full. And I knew there was a mortgage, there was debt on the house, and I was uncertain whether I was actually going to be able to pay it off. So I was so concerned that I literally would only go to the grocery store and buy anything that was on super special. And I really didn't even know, did I have enough money to eat, right? So the good news is that I called the banker with whom we had taken out the mortgage. And so the great thing, of course, again, because I had not at that point done any of the finances, I didn't actually quite remember that all of our assets were listed when we had applied for the loan.
Oh, yes. Yes, yes.
This is a very important thing to know. Because, wow, I'm like, great, okay, now I have a list, and now I can start to contact these places, these banks. My husband, who also, as I said, was a physician, had retirement accounts of his own. I had been employed in a practice in Missouri, so I could get those assets. And so, and unfortunately, the system was a bit messy because my husband liked having many, many, many different bank accounts with a little bit of everything everywhere. And so just trying to consolidate all that information. So it was fantastic that I had this list, at least from the bank, and at least I could start to get to work. The second thing that happened is that fortuitously, my father-in-law was retired military. And at some point earlier, I had solicited a account through USAA. So I had an account at the USAA. And they were fantastic because they were very accustomed to having to work with families in where one of the members is military, and now they have provisions and counselors, financial and emotional, to support the families as they're now going from maybe having a 2 income generating to 1, or only a 1 income generating to none. And so they really gave me a strategy upon which I could work upon to try to budget. So again, now we're going back to the budgeting thing. Okay, so this is how much money I have coming in. These are all my debts. Okay, I have money left over. Oh, great. So this is good. So that's what the main thing that I've learned truly, and I want to share with all other women, is that even if you're married, or even if you have a parent or a significant other who is very versed in finances, or appears to be versed, you need to be informed. You need to understand, and you need to be in agreement with that plan. And perhaps one of the best things that you can do if you are going to enter into a long-term relationship, and if it comes under the legal covenants of marriage, that you need to understand what that implies. and make sure that you are protected. And I actually now, in hindsight, think that the actual exercise of going through a prenuptial agreement, even whether you don't do it legally, but just going through the exercise of agreeing upon how you are going to conduct your businesses, how is the money going to get diverted? Do you have the same goals in reference to what you are going to invest in, or how is your philanthropic gifting going to be? Those are very important things to understand before you enter into a long-term commitment. So that brings me then to my second marriage. So I was very fortunate. God really was very good to me because my first husband was very dear, very loving. We had a wonderful relationship, and he sent me another second great guy who now I've been married to 15 years. So, so now I'm a little wiser, and with the help of, so at the time that he had proposed me, I had very much got really organized my finances. I understood my finances, and because I had to go through probate, which was a very interesting experience because there was no will, there was no trust. Everything was very messy. As I said, I told you, my husband had many, many, many different accounts and many different banks. And sometimes the beneficiaries of some of these accounts were not me, and he had just simply never updated them. So some of these accounts were like over 20 years old, even before I had ever met him. So it was very, very messy.
Yeah.
So I realized, and this is the second thing I tell everyone, is that you really want to do your family the favor of getting yourself organized.
Can you just say that one more time? Because I feel like it's one of those things that people, when they hear it, they feel like, someone's just trying to sell them something, or, they're trying to convince them to do something. But it's too, like, when it's too late, it is too late.
Yes.
So can you say that again?
So one cannot, as a gift to your family, perhaps the best gift that you can give your family and the people who love you and the people that you are giving authority to make decisions in your behalf, whether they be your health, which, of course, that's very important as I work with people, but also in reference to your finances. Make your wishes clear and generate the proper tools so that it is easy for those that follow after you. So there is truly no worse scenario than you are grieving the departure of someone you deeply love, it's your best friend, and superimposed on that, you had the hardship of all the legal, healthcare financial ramifications of what happens after someone dies. So I think that making a clear document or a distribution or a trust. So what I decided to do after it took literally almost 4 years to clean up, to get through probate, to get through all the mess, trying to understand where everything was, get everything consolidated, get the people who were the designated beneficiaries to actually get the proper paperwork to them.
Right.
And even when you think you're done, you're not done. So my husband had been dead for over 15 years, and there were still more things that popped out of the blue. So it's amazing how the dead are never really dead. In terms of their legal financial implications. So you do want to do what is in your power to really share the love of organization. So by loving your family members and the people you care about, getting your act together, organizing your finances, making it exceptionally clear, and making the designation when you still have the ability to do so, so that you don't generate amongst your loved ones feuds, discrepancies of opinion in reference to how you want your health decisions made for you, and how you want your wealth distributed, and who you want to care for, or what philanthropy you want to support. So those things need to be done very carefully, very thoughtfully. And the nice thing is that as time evolves and you age and those that you care for also age, and perhaps some are present and some are not, or things have evolved, you have the ability to think about how you want your resources distributed. So to encapsulate, I think a prenup is very important because it allows you to really think together how you want to conduct your healthcare choices, your financial choices. How do you want to invest? What are you going to invest in? How do you want to bring up your children if there's the possibility of having children? How do you want to care for those people who are dependent upon you, your parents, your siblings, your children, other people who are not your siblings? How do you want to distribute your wealth to charitable organizations? In what fashion? And so think about before you get together, because now you're together, and then you can at any point have to do something called a postnup, which I have done, my husband and I have done, and it's great because after a certain number of years, we're like, we think we have valued things in a different way now, so let's get together and let's reorganize this. And it's also, I think, great opportunities to talk to your attorneys and your financial consultants as to what is the best mechanism to take care of one another long term. So my husband and I both have provisions for one another where our primary goal, at least for us, is to take care of each other. And then, how do we take care of everybody else? And the charitable organizations that we hold dear is for each one of us. So each one, and we don't share the same philosophy in reference to charitable organization, but we respect each other's choices. So that's a very important thing to also talk about and understand where the other person is coming from, so that if it just falls upon you to make those monetary designations, that you do it in the vein of the thought of the person that you're representing.
Absolutely.
So, and then designations for your family, we both have done them through trust, so that we can make sure that the people who we feel are dependent upon us or need our financial support after we're passed is clearly designated. So there's hopefully, as a result of all this careful planning, there will be no conflict amongst our family members, there will be no feuds, there will hopefully not be any litigation, and that way we will hopefully help to maintain the loving spirit within our families. And
absolutely. And you touched on so many great points there, but even more importantly, with having the trust, then you're avoiding the probate, because like you mentioned, the probate, I mean, it's an exhaustive process. It's a public process, so it becomes public record. It's very timely. So just as you discussed, I mean, if you are going through that time of grieving, you do not want to have to deal with the courts and all of that stuff. So that's great.
I can't say enough about trying to organize ahead of time. Probate is very, very messy.
Yeah.
Yes, everything is public. There can be contenders to the estate. I have now gone through 2 probates, one for my father and my husband, and so I felt fortunate with my husband's probate. It was fairly straightforward, even though because we had just moved from one state to another, there were different legalities to being a multi-state probate. So my husband was originally from New York, so he had property in the state of New York, and then there was things in Missouri, and there were things here. So it actually involved attorneys in 3 states. So it just got very messy in that regard, because as I mentioned, there were things everywhere.
Yeah.
So understanding what that implies when you're dead is very important. But my father's probate actually, because he also was very messy, and despite my urging, so my husband died before my father died, and I had learned so much, and I really had encouraged my families, please make things clear, create a trust, designate, and my mother, and until this day, my mother still says, no, we're not going to do any of that, and you're just going to have to deal with it when I die.
Oh my God.
So just not nice.
Yeah.
My mother won't even throw away books that are like 60 years old because she doesn't want to deal with it.
Oh my gosh. Well,
Anyway.
and there's so many of us who have parents who do think that and say that,
Oh,
they're
they're
just
hoarders.
like, look,
Yeah.
I don't want
No,
to deal with it. And sorry, go
it is
ahead.
hilarious. No, it's
Yeah.
hilarious. My mother is like, and my mother's one of these people who likes to think that there's a secret place for everything in the house, right? So she'll have, like, $100 bills under in this book, and over here, and then
Oh no.
and she'll just report to you. She'll say, well, if I die, my dad would do that too. If I die, well, we have to look here, and then you have to look there, and you have to look under
Oh
this
my
pantry,
gosh.
and you have to look inside under the dash, and under this. I'm like, can you not just put it in a bank and like leave it as a trust?
Or at least just put it all in one book.
Maybe that would have been good. But no, very, very
Oh
lots
gosh.
and lots of, and I think as I get older, sometimes that occurs, and I see that, in a lot of even my own patients, that there's a certain degree of suspicion, and maybe more so with my parents' generation, and where they have a distrust of credit cards because they were not brought up on the credit card philosophy. And so my mother still to this day will not pay anything with a credit card. She pays everything with cash or a check.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Even when she's here in the United States. And so it's very interesting. And so we have to recognize that, but it makes for a very, very messy death. So my father's probate took 6.5 years. Very messy. Very, very, very messy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. If there, I try to encourage people. I know that there's a perception that it just costs a lot of money to have a trust, but just like you said, it costs so much time and energy later. It's just one of those things you want to be proactive about. It's just estate planning in general. So I love that you brought up about the prenup. I think that's another important discussion that couples should have, because the thought of a prenup means in some people's mind that we're going in saying this is going to fail. And I think you just clearly highlighted why it's so important to do, because you want it to be a successful relationship, right? At some
Right.
point, we are all going to die. I think that's the first thing, that people don't like to talk about, the fact that we are going
Mm-hmm.
to die at some point.
That's
We should
true.
be prepared for that, and we should prepare our loved ones for that. So a
Mhm.
prenup would be a great way to do that. So you're really showing and demonstrating love and belief in that relationship when you
Mhm.
do something like a prenup, or at
Mhm.
least just go see an estate planner and just discuss these things, so that
Mhm.
it can be written out, it can be decided. To your
Right.
point, oh, go ahead. Go
No,
ahead.
I just wanted to, again, agree with you 100%. I think that you brought up a very important point, and this is one of the arguments that I've had with my parents, and even with my brother, although he and his wife have now moved on to creating their own trust, is what they immediately respond to is, oh, it's going to cost me money. And my answer to that is that it's going to cost you even more money
Yes.
if you
Right.
have to go through probate,
Yes.
because the attorney fees are, you have to pay the attorney one way or another.
Yes.
And
You're
you
gonna pay
have to,
way
and
more
yeah,
in
and
probate. Yeah.
it's like hiring a financial consultant. So and I tell people, when I'm a physician, and so obviously I'm generating advice. A majority of what I do is advise people. And so and you would hope that you are seeking advice from someone who is a professional, and that is
Right.
going to advise you in your best interest. And that's the key thing to know, and to
Yes.
make sure that you feel secure, that your attorney, your estate planner is advising you in what is your personal interest, and the same thing with your financial consultant. And so getting back to the prenup and the estate, the trust, I have an independent attorney to that of my husband, because it was important that as we were talking about the different points of the prenups, that we each have our own representation, and that
Yeah.
document was created by independent attorneys, but that we could agree on these different points. And that way, one member of the partnership doesn't necessarily feel that they are not equally represented. So I think
Right.
that's also an important thing to understand. And by the same token, your financial consultant, if you feel that you need to have, and I have certain assets that are managed completely separately from that of my husband, and we have things
Mhm.
that are joint. because of the fact that we both had pre-existing marriages, and he had inherited money. And so we wanted to manage those independently of what we have jointly. And it doesn't have to get this complicated, clearly,
Right.
but I think one must feel, one, that you understand, and that you have representation. And actually, the cost of assuring all of that monetarily is by far outweighed by your peace of mind, and by
Yes.
by your peace of mind that you know that things are as well structured, that represent what your priorities are, and that you are going to diminish the pain and suffering that will be additive to your parting. And so that cannot even be quantitated in dollars. Having lived it myself, I felt that I was grieving, and that on top of that, the additional legal and financial implications of not understanding where the money was, having to literally, search for it to try to then at a late hour understand it, and that angst of not knowing whether I was going to be able to afford the house I was living in or not, could have been easily overcome by some joint planning that was clear and that was consolidated to minimize the problems that I had to endure later. So I am a very vocal, I'm a very vocal proponent that it doesn't have to be complicated, but particularly I think as a woman, and many women feel that this is the man's job, that you administrate the micro administration of the household, the children, the parents, maybe the health, the garden, the kitchen. But this is equally important. This is equally important, that you need to understand, you need to be participant. You need to be participant. It does not have to be complicated, but you need to be participant, and you need to give clear designation. And the cost of assuring all of that monetarily upfront is far less than what it's going to cost later.
And the other important thing is that women tend to live longer than men. So if you outlive your husband and you have not had any idea how the finances work, and that happened in your situation, even though you were very young, but even if you get into an older state, you have to know where to begin, where to start. And I think the other important thing is for the person who does, put their plans in writing, then you know that your plans, your desires will be executed because you had it written down, right? A perfect example when we talked about it doesn't even have to be about money, is because I have had this conversation. I bring it up with my parents. My dad will be 80 in a few weeks, and I have a twin brother and I have an older sister. And my dad has this album that we all love, the three siblings love. And I've said to him, I'm like, Daddy, I better get that album when you pass away. And all three of us want it. Exactly, right. So it's so funny because all three of us want it, I said, nope, I don't want to buy it. I want your copy, So it's one of those things where, and we'll have to live with whatever he decides. But it's one of those things where just whatever your desires are financially, like you said, whether it's health, any of those things, they'll be documented. And then once you pass, your loved ones will know what your wishes were. And that's what will get executed. And if it's in a trust, it will be done privately and it can be done swiftly. Right?
Right.
So this is great. Yeah. So Patricia, thank you so much for sharing your story and just what it's been like, what the journey's been like. And obviously you have, you started with a really great foundation with your dad teaching you about budgeting in that smart way. But then also you had to endure such a painful period, but you came through it and you're in a great marriage.
I've learned from it.
Yes, and you learned from it. And that's what life is about, right? So hopefully people who are listening to this can hear the importance of just having professionals around you who can make sure that you're making good decisions, whether it's on the legal side or financial side, so that your loved ones will always know what, really what your desires were in the event that you pass away. And when you're in a relationship and you're open and having those conversations, there's no secret, there's nothing to hide, there's nothing to be anxious about, because again, you have peace of mind that your wishes, will be executed upon your death.
Well, it makes
So
a true partnership
yeah,
in all realms. Yeah.
absolutely. So Patricia, thank you so much again for
You're
your time
welcome.
today. Maybe I'll
Thank
have
you.
you on again. But I really appreciate you sharing your
My
story.
pleasure. And anytime.
Okay.
You're welcome,
We will,
Leslie. Thank you. And thank you
okay.
to all your viewers.
All right. We will talk soon.
Bye-bye now.